celebration, folks. Viewpoint is on the air. Our associate co-host had a hard time getting through the door. Mr. Ash was busy working at the console, looking at the clock. Fear not, we're here.
The late, great Bill and Judy.
Okay. Viewpoint, of course, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. And we certainly brought back a personality and a different perspective here this morning. We've had this gentleman on as our guest before, and we're going to Judy's going to introduce him shortly. But as usual at Viewpoint, a couple of kudos. We have our two educational institutions here at Lincoln Christian University and Lincoln College, both of whom have great fine arts programs. We're building on the fine arts program at Lincoln College. And we have a great young lady there, Dr. Denise Gossett. And this Thursday and Friday, this week, that'd be tomorrow and Friday, they're going to have a concert, contemporary jazz ensemble. I'm certain contemporary jazz doesn't fall under the purview of music that I like, but having said that, those young folks are very artistic. They work hard, and they deserve your support. So at the Johnson Center for the Performing Arts next tomorrow and Friday at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a contemporary jazz ensemble. That'll be a fun thing to watch. Gene and I attended Christian College's Christian Seminary Christmas in the Chapel again. I want to tell you, Mrs. Busby, that was a Broadway-type production.
Yes, I am sure.
It was just fantastic.
It is annually.
Over 70 in that cast. The costuming, the lighting, the entire thing was big league stuff. As I said to somebody, the old Broadway critics that would write that up, they'd say boffo. It was just really outstanding. So, congratulations to those folks out there. One final thing. December 7th, 1941. Does anybody remember that? A couple of you out there, maybe both of our listeners, 4 of our listeners now.
Yeah, we got it.
We're still here.
It was in all the papers.
It was in all the papers. Right. That's a good line, Jim.
Oh,
that's exactly right. There's a story about that, Jonathan. George Goebel, a really funny comedian.
Do you remember him?
Oh, he's too young.
I don't remember the name.
Jonathan's too young.
See?
Anyway,
So young.
he was on the
I'm
Johnny
57, just for the...
He was on the Johnny
Too young.
Carson show, and he was a flight instructor in Oklahoma during the Second War, and Carson brought that up, and Goebel says, "Oh yeah, that was in the Second War," and then he said, just quickly like Mr. Rice said, "It was in all the papers. You must remember that."
He was a funny man. It's too bad you missed that era, because I thought he was a
Well, it's just as well he didn't. Look how old he'd be if he remembered it.
That's right.
So think of that.
No, I remember Johnny Carson. I just don't remember that person. What's the name again?
George Goebel.
He's a little short
Goebel,
fellow.
no.
Yeah.
And he was dry. Very dry, but
Very.
a very funny man. But World War II, December 7th, 1941, as I said, this Friday, which will be the 7th, at 12 noon, in our museum at the college, they're going to have once again, the boys from our American Legion Post 263, the Honor Squad. By the way, they do an awful lot of good for a lot of people at times of death in the family. I don't care what the weather is. They'll show up if you want an honor squad. Mm-hmm. So they're going to present. There will be a presentation of program at our museum at Lincoln College on the north side of the campus there, 12 noon. Urge you to show up. Take a few minutes to remember what happened December 7th. Now I've talked way too much. I think we brought our guest in for a very special reason.
Well, and since we're late getting started because of the choo-choo coming down the track.
You can call it that. You were just out there talking.
Plus it was my fault. Not the train, but the lateness. Jonathan Pierce has been with us before. He is with Lincoln College. He is a nice man. Mm-hmm. And he has such an interesting background, and after he was with us here a little bit ago to talk about his position at the college and some pretty spanky new ideas they have there, we got to talking about his life, and it was so fascinating. We asked him if he wouldn't mind please coming back and sharing it with our listeners, and he said, oh yeah, heck yes, he'd do that. So here he is.
Well, our thought was, Mr. Pierce grew up at a formative time for much of his formative years in a foreign culture, in a foreign land, and went to school down there. So I think we'd just take it from there. Jonathan, tell us how you got down to South America.
Sure. Thank you again for having me on the program. Pleasure to see you this morning. I was only 6 months old when my parents left the U.S. and went to Brazil to be missionaries. So in the very southern part of Brazil is where they landed in 1961. And so I grew up, 15 years of my childhood life was in Brazil. We lived in the very southern part of the country where there was a high population of Germans who had fled World War II and the Nazi regime. And so we grew up
and
among...
some Nazis who also got away
Yes,
after
Nazis
the war.
ended up down there as well, in Argentina as well. So we grew up in an area with a lot of Germans. So as a youngster, the first language I learned was Portuguese because that's the national language of Brazil. But because we lived in that German population, I learned German as a second language as a child. But then when I started learning English, my supposed native language, then I dropped German and never retained any of it. At least that's what my parents tell me. But growing up in a different culture is just such a eye-opening experience. Nowadays Brazil is considered a modern country in many respects, but there is still a great disparity between the very poorest people and the very wealthy. There's the middle class is starting to grow and has been for the past 2 or 3 decades, but my experience as a kid was vastly different. I was telling you last time I was on the program that the kids that I grew up with lived in a house probably half the size of your facility here, one wood-burning stove, one bed, and the stove was used for cooking and heating, so there's no such thing as central heat, central air. Well in the front yard, an outhouse in the backyard, and a dirt floor, a real simple wood slat house with either a tin roof or tile roof, which was real common back then. And these are the kids that I just ran around with and stomped around, and they were my playmates and friends,
Oh, sure. They were your neighbors.
Absolutely.
That's who you get to know.
Right.
I think from the very beginning, your parents were awfully brave taking a 6-month-old and going to the southernmost part of Brazil. And I say that because I've got a lot of little peccadillos, but one is I was so afraid that my kids would ever face a germ head on. To take a 6-month-old baby down into this
foreign land.
Yeah, that's pretty brave.
It is brave, and there's a big story behind why my parents went down there to begin with. So recently in the news, we've heard of that American Chinese young fella who went to an Indian island just off the coast of India, and the island is populated by an indigenous population of people that are not contacted by modern civilization, and their modern civilization is prohibited from contacting them. And he went to wanting to meet with them, and of course they killed him and buried him in the sand. So if you go back into the 1950s, and I don't recall the exact year or date, but there were a group of missionaries that went to Ecuador to try to reach another tribe of uncontacted people. And there were 3 or 4 fellas that flew in on a little prop plane, landed on a sandbar at the river, and they tried to reach out to these people. Within a relatively short period of time, all 3 or 4 of these fellows were shot with arrows and killed. And so that event, as it gained a lot of notoriety and a lot of publicity around the world, is what prompted many new missionaries to go out into the field. And that very event is what prompted my parents to become missionaries, because they kind of felt the need to go out and start churches and evangelize, that type of thing.
Now, you said when they chose that life, they weren't affiliated with a particular church group when they went?
They were they're affiliated with what's called the Plymouth Brethren. It's an evangelical Christian organization. They have a mission base in New Jersey somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where. And so they were affiliated with a non-denominational church group. And all missionaries go out fully supported from people and churches. They don't typically go through their own funding. So in my parents' case, they had to raise support and to a certain level before they could even go to the field. Yeah.
You talk about depth of faith.
Oh boy, yeah.
I mean, how deep can faith get?
Right.
And I think that probably epitomizes about as far as you can go.
Yeah, for you and I, we get a regular paycheck, or we live off of retirement, or whatever it may be. We have a fairly comfortable life here in the U.S., for the most part. There are populations of our country that are suffering and in need of help and food and shelter and whatnot.
But our very worst is better than many countries' very best.
Yeah. There were times when my folks had no money left in the bank account and virtually no food left in the house, and Dad had just enough money to take a bus ride to the post office, because they don't deliver mail to your home, at least not at that time. I don't know if they do now. So he had just enough money to take a bus ride to the post office, open his post office box, and in the box is a check from the mission organization.
Manna from heaven.
Always on time, never more than needed, but always on time. And we were always taken care of. We never were hungry. We always had clothing sent from the U.S. So I look back at some of the pictures of us as kids, we just looked like Goodwill kids and Salvation Army kids.
Well, that's probably what you were.
Back from the older days, Goodwill and Salvation Army was bottom of the barrel attire. Nowadays, you can find really nice things there, but that wasn't the case back then. So we often got hand-me-downs, and my brother was 3 years older, so I got his hand-me-downs. Our sister was 9 years older than me, so we never had those, obviously.
You were 3 kids?
There were 3 of us, yeah. So there were 9, 3, and 6 months when we all went down there.
Holy Friday. Ufta.
Man, that takes courage.
Oh, dear
Oh,
heaven.
my.
Yeah.
As I said, faith.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Now, down there, your mother couldn't have gone to Charlie's IGA and need to get a dozen eggs. How does she shop down there?
Back in those days, there was no such thing as a supermarket.
No.
It was all individual stores. So you had a baker, a fish store, a meat market. Similar to our farmers market today, there was a weekly farmers market in the city where there would be canvas tents, and people from the outlying communities would bring their groceries, the things that they raised, vegetables and things of that nature, would bring it, and that's how you shopped. You just went down the supermarket of, a farmer's market, and you purchased whatever
you could
vegetables and supplies you needed there.
As needed.
Right.
Now, in school, sir, you were, for want of a better word, and I have to be very careful, you were the white kid mixed up in another ethnic group. Your day-to-day activities, of course, that's all they knew and that's all you knew. So you grew up together, and there's no difference.
There was no difference, and that's probably more true of southern Brazil and the state that we lived in. There were a lot of Germans, so they looked like us. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, light-skinned. The majority of the Brazilian population is very mixed. It's a combination of European, native Brazilian Indian, and African descent. And so they're just beautiful people. But a lot of them have more of an African and Indian appearance to them, and slightly darker skin, much shorter. Even when I was in high school, I'm thinking back when about the time I got my driver's license, I was 5'4". a full 107 pounds. And I was tall and had big feet in comparison to my friends in Brazil.
Is that right?
Yes, I was very tall in comparison to them.
Just
so
a giant.
they're much shorter in stature. But I never felt as an outsider based on my race. I never had any kind of issue. In fact, one of the schools that I attended was a German Lutheran school, and that's not the affiliation my parents had, but folks in the U.S. would provide my folks with enough money to send us to private school so that we could get a decent education. But it was in Portuguese, but it was a German Lutheran school, so very formal, uniforms, and in that time frame, I'm going to go on a rabbit trail here about the school for a little bit, but very interesting how the administrators of the school required respect from the students. Anytime an adult would walk into the classroom, all students were required to stand at attention to the left of their desk and wait until the guest or the teacher told them to sit down. This was just customary. So every time another teacher walked in or another adult, everybody would stand up as a show of respect for that individual. We need that today, don't we?
Oh, where are those people when we need them?
Exactly. But that school is very formal. We had uniforms, brown and white and whatnot. But anyway, because it was a German Lutheran school, there were a lot of, obviously, Germans there as well. So I never felt like an outcast being an American. I did feel very odd when I would come back to the U.S. because I didn't understand American culture. I didn't understand kids my age, my peers. I didn't understand their interests.
I see, and you were about 15 at that time.
Well, we would come back occasionally over the years, to visit churches and to get medical care or whatever it may be. So we probably came back 6-8 times during that time frame. But every time I felt a little bit of an outcast here because I was attending Brazilian schools or Portuguese-speaking schools, and oftentimes when I'd come back to the U.S., I not only didn't speak English very well, I couldn't read.
Oh, sure.
So if you imagine, I do all my formative years in Portuguese, and then I'd come to the U.S. and we're visiting churches, and I'm required to read something in English. I didn't know how to read.
No.
So it was just bizarre, and their school system is different. They're in the southern hemisphere, so their winter is opposite of ours.
Yeah.
So whenever we would leave for a winter break there, we would come here, it would be in the middle of a school year. And so we would get plugged into a school here smack in the middle of the year. And as I was telling you at our previous appearance here, back in those days, if a student wasn't very smart or was having some kind of disability, there were no disability services in those days.
Sure.
No.
You just sat in the hall.
Well, we didn't have that here
when I
either.
came back to the U.S., I found myself sitting out in the hallway with 3 or 4 other kids who had various types of learning disabilities, and those became my classmates.
Sure.
And
your friends.
And friends, yeah.
We're going to be disabled at this station if we don't honor our commercial here, because if they withdraw their support, we're disabled. Go right ahead, Jim. Right, back live in the studios here at WLCN. The program is Viewpoint, of course. We had a particularly interesting guest this morning, Dr. Jonathan Pierce, who had a very unusual, quote, growing up, unquote, experience. At the age of 6, was taken to the country of Brazil by his missionary parents, and spent about 15 years down there, which is pretty doggone remarkable. 648-5510. If anybody has any questions of Dr. Pierce, don't hesitate. He had a very, very, very unusual growing up period. Now, Dr. Pierce, when you came back, at what point in time in your life did you begin to assimilate and get into learning how to use the English language?
Well, when I
you
came
were
back,
in Portuguese. Your background down there was all Portuguese and German.
It was. Towards the last 2 years that we were there, my folks sent me to an American school. So it was actually an international school in our city where a lot of foreign students from other countries would come, and we would learn English, and all of our studies were in English there. So I would call that probably my junior high years, 7th, 8th grade probably. I don't recall exactly, but that was in English. But when I came back to the U.S., I was a freshman, and I attended a small Christian private school in New Berlin that my aunt and uncle ran at the time. And then I finished my senior year at Lanphier High School in Springfield. But not having had a solid education in terms of one language, one system, you think of history, science, literature, it's all different from both countries. So it was a bit difficult to get back into the U.S. system and to learn grammar and all those things where it wasn't really part of my formative years.
Right.
So I still did okay in high school. I was pretty much just an average student. And when it came time to think about college, I attended 1 year of Emmaus Bible College. It was originally in Oak Park, Illinois, and they later purchased a Catholic seminary in Dubuque, Iowa, and moved over there. But that 1 year of college was dismal at best. I wouldn't describe it as a stellar experience.
What age were you? Just out of high school at that
Yeah,
era?
I was 19 at that time. So I graduated from high school when I was 19, and this is one of the weird things about the dual culture situation that I went through. At some point, I must have been put back a year in grade school, perhaps, because I was 19 before I graduated from high school. I mean, you just don't hear of that anymore.
And now you have your doctorate.
Now I have my doctorate, and it's been an interesting road to that process.
Yes,
Yeah.
And in retrospect, do you think your growing up years, having been so varied, has ended up being a blessing in some respects?
I wouldn't doubt it. I don't view it as a curse at all. Having grown up in a different country, different culture, and all the different experiences that I had, I feel very fortunate to have had that experience. But it's not without its challenges and difficulties,
I'm sure.
As I mentioned, when I'd come back to the U.S., I felt like an outcast because I didn't fit in with the kids at church and at school. Sports were vastly different. In Brazil, they play soccer, volleyball, ping pong.
Yeah.
Here they played baseball, basketball, football. I had no idea what to do with any of those round and oval and gloved things. I was like, I never knew how to play with them. We never had them in Brazil.
No.
And back in those days, soccer was a sissy game here in the U.S.
It was
yes. Barely up and coming. But going through those early years of trying college and it being kind of a dismal event at best, I decided not to pursue any more college. And my wife and I got married a year after we finished that 1 year. And we just celebrated our 36th anniversary at the end of November. So we went on, worked in different places. I've worked in so many different organizations and industries, but through a series of life events, my wife and I started a home-based headhunting executive recruiting firm out of our home in Springfield, just outside of Springfield. And we started that in March of 2001, and we were recruiting pharmacy directors and managers for hospitals. Now, you wouldn't think that hospitals have pharmacy directors, but they do. They all have to still manage and dispense drugs and medications, through the legal process. So we started in March of 2001, and we immediately had contracts with hospitals around the country, and I was starting to make placements. And then you recall what happened on September 11th of 2001, fondly known as 9/11 now. When that event happened, from that point forward, 75% of all headhunting firms around the country shut down because employers were no longer going to hire until they saw whether we were going to go to war or what would happen as a result of 9/11. And employees stopped looking for jobs because they didn't want to move. The economy surely would be hindered by that, and there'd be other issues. So when employers and employees aren't talking anymore, and opportunities shut down, the recruiting industry takes a hit. So here we had just started our firm, and now 9/11 happened. And it's typical with most entrepreneurship opportunities, up to 75% of them fail within the first 5 years. So, we didn't have a big bankroll that we could just keep funding it to keep going. So we held on for a couple of years, but eventually we had to just stop.
Make a decision.
And we lost our home, we lost everything. We just started over with zero, literally. So we had to move from our country home into an apartment in Springfield. But through that series of events, I'm leading to the story of why I went back to college. My wife suggested, you really need to get a college education. So in 2004, I started attending adult accelerated classes in Springfield. And these were held in the evening, so I was still working during the day at a different job and going to school at night. And I was just petrified, scared to death, because my only recollection of college
Was not good.
was not good.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't think I was intelligent, and I didn't have the right study habits. And so I was just petrified to go and sit in a class and try to do college again. It was very frightening. But as I started attending my first and second courses and I got A's in the classes, I thought, oh, that has to be a fluke. Because I'm not smart,
You're still convinced of that at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So I took my third and fourth classes and I got A's, and I was getting good reviews for my writing. And I slowly began to realize that something happened between that first college attempt and this one, between 21-year-old and 43. Something happened in between that time frame, and I didn't know that I had transformed into something different, somebody different. And I started to realize that I actually have an interest in learning. I enjoyed the class environment. It was other people like me, peers, adults who were working, managing families. And so I continued on, got my associate's degree. But I realized that associate's isn't quite enough in contemporary work environment, so I stayed for the bachelor's degree. But that's a game changer, right? The associate's degree is hard. Going to the bachelor program is a game changer. So once again, I went through that same mindset. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. It's going to be hard. Well, I finished my baccalaureate degree with a 4.0 and got inducted into 2 honor societies as well. And it was during my bachelor program that I started getting an interest in teaching at the college level. So I asked my faculty, how do you make that happen? How do you become a college professor or a teacher? And they said, well, you have to have a master's degree to do that. And I'm like, oh, great. Here we go again, right? Those same trepidations crept back into my mind. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. But I bit the bullet, went through my master's degree, and got that in organizational behavior. And so once I had my master's degree, I was able to start teaching at the college level part-time in Springfield. And that's how I gained my early teaching experience. But it became evident that to get a full-time teaching position at a college or university, I would need a doctorate degree. So once again, those same trepidations crept back in. It's like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I can't do this. But in December of 2012, I enrolled in a doctorate program in management through Walden University. It's a fully online program. And what I really needed was the flexibility of an online doctorate degree so that I could take college with me wherever.
Right.
I didn't want to be tied to a campus, a building. So then in January of 2018 is when I finally completed my degree and was awarded a doctorate in management. So, this idea of adults going back to school is very frightening. It's really scary for a lot of people. Some adults have no college at all, and so they're starting from scratch. Some finished an associate's degree but never went on. And so this is one of the things that Lincoln College offers that you alluded to early in our conversation is up at the Bloomington Normal campus, we have what's called the ABE program, Accelerated Bridge to Education. And they're evening classes that are held usually from 5:30 to 9:30. And students meet once a week, and they go through a normal college environment where there's a professor teaching the material, there's a lot of group and interactive activities that happen, and a lot of online activities that they're also responsible for. So it's not just in class. They also have to do some online engagement for the coursework. But what's really unique about the AID program is that it's designed for working adults. Most of those are 5-week classes. So imagine you open the book, you close the book, and everything is due during that 5-week period. So it's a lot of work that these students have to do. But it's very rewarding because many of them wouldn't have no opportunity to go back to school in a traditional setting, Monday through Friday, daytime classes. They can't give up their work.
Right.
So this really opens up an excellent opportunity for them to expand their own learning.
And this
get
is
a
part of the
degree.
strength of Lincoln College, besides being a traditional college for college-age students, the younger folks. This adult education program that Lincoln College offers is a huge part of what we do there on that campus. And I just think, I sat there on the platform as I've watched these adult students come across and receive their degrees, and you see just a lot of satisfaction in these adults having made that achievement.
Absolutely. And what's really fun too is that for many of these adults, they have high school and college age kids.
Sure.
And so
Yes,
it's a learning, it's an example for those kids as well. Even while I was going through school, I kept telling my kids, look, Dad's going to school full time and I'm getting A's. I expect the same out of you, And
Fair's
so
fair.
It is fair, right? And I'm working full time and managing a family and interests and hobbies and church and whatever it may be,
Right.
So for many of these adult students, they have high school kids, and so it's really neat to see families come together and support their parent as they go through school and see them get that degree. It's a really transformational experience.
I'd like it if we could back up just a little bit here. You talked about as a youngster and being
Multicultural?
Yes. Now, because you had to learn how to do everything in Portuguese, in Brazil's, in keeping with their lifestyles, and then you had to learn all about English and all about schools here. And I can see how sitting out in the hall with your 3 or 4 other little friends would have been a heck of an experience for a kid.
Demeaning.
But yeah, so then you think, I'm less. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. And no matter the achievements you've had, you kept hanging on to that. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. You just couldn't put it aside. Is that what happens to young people?
I have a hard time relating to what some young people face today, but they face a whole different set of challenges. From where they live, the city, the location, the neighborhood, things of that nature. But I can only imagine that if they don't have any kind of support system on the home front, that they're going to face some of those same feelings of they're just not good enough. They can't do it. And our educational system isn't that great. They don't. And I'm speaking really broad terms here, but many schools don't prepare students for college life. And so they do come to Lincoln College unprepared for the expectations, for the rigor that's expected, for the behaviors that we expect. And so it is a challenge. In some respects, our students come to Lincoln College and it's a cultural shock to them.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Right? Because it's a whole different environment, a whole different experience. So in much of the same way that I had to reorient myself to American culture and American way of doing things, these young students come from their communities and from their hometowns into this culture called college. It's not a bed and breakfast. It's not just a place to hang out and have fun or a place to escape the difficulties in the home life and in the neighborhood. It's a place to come and be transformed and to find their greatest potential. And so for a lot of the first year students, it's a real challenge for them when they come and try to experience everything that we have to offer, and they don't know how to take advantage, and oftentimes they don't have those life skills that are needed to succeed.
Well, that's one of the strengths that we have up there on our campus at Lincoln College, Doctor, is we have people dedicated to helping youngsters with their academics. They're not just out there thrown on in a lecture class and come back the next day and see how you make it. We have, if the youngster wants to, we have professionals who will spend time with them, helping them in whatever their shortcomings may be.
Absolutely. And we have, a whole suite of services available from our Academic Success Center, where we have tutors and individuals that help students learn how to study, learn those study skills and habits of classroom expectations. They have a course for their freshman year, and it's an introduction into college life, and we immerse them into various kinds of activities and show them what some of the expectations are for that first year. So we have a lot of services available for students, but as I mentioned previously, these students need to want to succeed. Some of them don't. Some of them come and don't try. They don't turn in the assignments. They miss 10, 12 class periods. And those aren't activities that are going to help them succeed, So if they want to succeed, we have a lot of services available, including very dedicated faculty that take time even outside of the classroom to help them as well.
Well, this hypothetical student who won't hand in the homework, probably hasn't done the homework, has no study habits, etc. If you have a kid like that, they obviously aren't ready for college. Do you think it's smart to tell them, well, then go out into the workforce and see how that works, and maybe in a year or two you'll go to college and take advantage of that opportunity?
I don't have those conversations with these kids, but that is something that actually happens.
I know.
Students, and even the adult students that we teach up at the normal campus, they face similar situations. They tried college, it was difficult at best, and years later they're like, I should have had a V8. I should have stayed in college. I should have continued.
Yes.
Should have done this sooner. I shouldn't have quit. I should have been more dedicated. All those should have, could have, would have come to bear at a really critical time. And that's the beauty of this ABE program, is that we're there for that adult student who has, in many respects, transformed their life. They're vastly different. They're more dedicated. Most of them have families that they're responsible for, and they just need that piece of paper. They need that degree in order to progress. Yeah.
Well, today's kids with a bachelor's degree are about like people in my day and age with a high school diploma.
Right.
You almost have to go beyond that.
You really do. And in the old days, a high school diploma was sufficient to get a good factory job. You could have a high school diploma and work at a factory for 20, 30, 40 years. Today's environment is very competitive. A bachelor's degree is almost minimum requirement, for many positions. Now, there are organizations that hire employees who have master's degrees and doctorate degrees, but most of the time what we find is employers want to see that employee working within the organization, and as they see leadership potential or supervisory potential or opportunities for them to grow and expand, they'll send them back to school then to get additional degrees. And that's where our forthcoming the possible master's degrees that we're going to bring in potentially in the fall of 2019, that's where we're going to see a great benefit for our ABE students, because many of them want to go on, and again, to get that next promotion, they need a master's degree. And so we're potentially going to offer a Master's of Business Administration and Master of Science in Organizational Leadership. And we see a great potential for it to start at the normal campus for the accelerated program, but then slowly bring in our traditional students as well, who would like to just stay in our culture, stay with a college that's comfortable for them, and get master's degrees there as well.
Yeah, Judy, after you get your master's, I think I can get you an advancement here at WLCN.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Well, our guest this morning, Dr. Jonathan Pierce, a gentleman who grew up from infancy to the age of about 15 in a foreign culture, a foreign country. At the age of 40, went back to college. And not only went back to college, but now has his doctorate. A success story, if I've ever read or heard one. We appreciate your sharing your time and your experiences with Dr. Pierce. Thank you for giving us that time.
My
I'd
pleasure.
like to quote something. I found a first lady of this country made this quotation. Learning is not attained by choice. It must be sought for with ardor and diligence. That's just exactly what happened, Jonathan Pierce.
And
Thank
her
you
name
very
was
much.
what?
Her name was Abigail. What would you
Van
think?
Buren.
Oh. How about Abigail Adams?
Okay.
The original Mrs. Adams. Thank you, Jim. Go ahead.
Never before.